Greetings, greetings. This is just a share, um, a share in regards to cult life lessons learned and cult patterns peeped, patterns observed, right? Life lessons. Because as we go through very challenging life lessons, hopefully we reflect back so that we can see where we need to apply corrective action. And so I don't come on and I don't speak often or share often. One, because there has been so much information that has come forward um, in different examples. There's so much information that has come forward for us to see very clearly. And it's the opportunity for us to see patterns, even if we don't know all the distinct details. Sometimes you're never going to know because you're looking through a computer screen, and it is quite clear everything cannot be seen through a computer screen. Thus, that leaves many people open to being manipulated. That's just what it is. But the purpose of me sharing and the intention is to share the cult life lessons learned, and to provide some insight so that people can shorten the learning curve and to observe and peep patterns, right? So that it doesn't necessarily have to take so long for people to see game. Because the reality is, it's easy for people to make people feel stupid, whether it's young people or older people, and say, you should know this, you should know that. But many people, in ignorance, lack of exposure, or maybe having been exposed to trauma, don't peep patterns for different reasons. Sometimes it's just pure ignorance and lack of experience, and that's not necessarily exclusive to age. And some people just don't have a frame of reference for what they're being exposed to. So something I wanted to just touch on is the some of the reasons, and going to the root of how we're vulnerable to cults, not just overseas, in the States. By now, people should see that cults are rampant, and they are in every culture, every ethnic background, every economic demographic. There are cults. Again, there's a whole playlist that so that people can educate themselves. It's not just Black folks trying to run away from something from city life that are exposed to cults. And sometimes we can be very hard on ourselves and hard on each other. But something I want to touch on as I sit and reflect on what makes us vulnerable to cults and to manipulators in general. There are many reasons, but I want to touch in on the normalization of verbal abuse. As a people, we're very colorful people culturally, um, and we're very expressive. And so there's an old term called doing the dozens. When I was coming up in high school, they called it getting hot on each other. And in our culture, it's very common for us to tease and joke about each other. Today, if we look at popular, I would say pretty much rap music, I don't know that we could even call it hip hop culture at this point, but if we look at the music, and a lot of our interactions with each other, it's very common for it to be, it's a sport for us to insult each other, whether it's our weight, our mothers, our trauma, a lot of the comedy, a lot of chocolate people that have made it or have made a name for themselves, if we really want to say made it, in the entertainment industry. It's been at the expense of exploiting our pain and laughing at our pain and tough things that we go to. So in a context, learning to or being able to laugh at certain things to lighten trauma and have something to look forward to, there's a context where that can be beneficial. But overall, what's being observed is the normalization of being talked to any kind of way, and the normalization of accepting abuse, the normalization of rationalizing abuse, and trying to come up in our mind. These are coping mechanisms for trauma, trying to make sense of it. Anybody that's been traumatized, we can look at sexual molestation, we can look at if somebody is murdering another person in this climate. We're going to rationalize in order to survive and to cope. We rationalize, we try to figure out why would a human being do something like that to another person. Being exposed in a cult with lots of time, or having lived in a cult, I've had to sit and reckon with how could women turn a blind eye to certain behaviors. And there are reasons. No one does something without a reason. And so if we seek the reason, perhaps we'll be more effective at moving past a lot of the trauma, developing some discernment, and being able to have these conversations with young people, or if nothing else, to be able to peep when this stuff is on the radar or it's in our environment. So it's no secret we've normalized verbal abuse, and many of us were not exclusive as Black people to groupthink, right? When someone does something outside of the group, and especially when the group on a whole, as a collective, has been traumatized, a lot of times we're moving from a place of fear and trauma, and it leaves us open to not listening to the signals of when it's time to move, to get out. Something's coming up as a red flag that I didn't see before, and to exit the space. Because one, we've been traumatized. Two, many people don't want to be alone. Three, people are vying for attention. Quite often, this is stemming from things that we didn't get romantically, and things that we didn't get perhaps from our parents. Master manipulators and predators are very, very well aware of human behavior. You don't necessarily have to go to college to study human behavior. A pimp or street thugs, people in gangs, as well as people in corporations, take the time because it's beneficial to their bottom line and to their profits, to study human behavior. And also, humans, and especially us as a group, we're constantly triggered. When we're triggered, we're not usually going to think straight. And all the things that we know to do, when to be quiet, when to be observant, when to ask questions, when we are triggered, it goes to survival mode. There's some people call it the reptilian brain, but basically your survival mechanism kicks in, and it's not going to be logical, because your emotions, it feels like something that has traumatized you, or something is about to traumatize you, is going to happen. So pretty much our common sense, or being strategic, is going to go out of the window. For folks that are younger, for younger people that have been traumatized, that don't have more life experience, this can be especially dangerous, and they can be especially vulnerable to being manipulated by cults. So, on so many levels, the verbal abuse is something I'm observing that really makes us vulnerable to being manipulated. As I'm watching some of the activity, and I can't watch it all the time, nor do I desire to, because it can really suck. It can suck you in. It can drain you, and there's a reason why there's such a large audience that is drawn to the dramas going on with these different cults, because we're seeing things played out, and that we can relate to in our personal lives, maybe with our parents or family members. So there's a reason why we are so drawn in and sucked into these real life dramas, where people are being traumatized, and people are trying to get away from something, not realizing and not having a frame of reference, or sometimes ignoring the red flags and being thrown into something that it looks like it's totally different, but it's another version of trauma. And once they're in deep, getting a lot more um, than they or we, had bargained for. So there's a constant justification, with all the verbal abuse. There's a constant mental justification for all the things that we see that don't feel right. as a woman that we know is not right. It's even amazing, but again, these things are as horrible as they are. They're opportunities for us to see and learn. I would say it's another reason why many people, even with the drama, are tuned in, right? Because it's easier to look at this stuff from outside and see it happening to other people. Men can watch this stuff also. It's not just women can watch other men being subjected to cults, because a lot of this manipulation is coming from us being our fears being manipulated. And women have fears. We may not be as brawn and as muscular as men, but men also have fears. All human beings have fears, and a predator and a manipulator is going to tap right into those things. Um, it's not common for men to talk um, about their fears. I think this is another way that men can be manipulated by the father figure that's put forth, or that's painted, the picture that's painted by a cult leader. We have a tendency to second guess ourselves, because when someone says something with enough confidence, we follow it, and it seems so. I don't even know, it seems so illogical, but if we just step back and look at how, as humans that are craving attention, also as many people have been traumatized and mishandled, often sexually, or been exposed to violence, or are scared for their basic survival. If that survival is economic, or if that survival is people just really being scared to be alone or abandoned, these are things that make us that can render us vulnerable to being manipulated. And these things are not going to go away just because we watch a video, right? So I definitely think this is one of the reasons why we're glued and fixated to the screen, or we're drawn in. Kind of like if you think back in the day of Jerry Springer, and you can't believe what you see playing out before your eyes, or you can't believe that people could be, quote unquote, so stupid as to follow this person or that person. But it's not logic. It's human emotions and human fears. And you expose people to enough trauma, you violate them, you inflict them with violence, then we become ingrained with something. We have a trigger, and we have a trigger reflex. And folks know how to manipulate that. So it's to our advantage to take the time to educate ourselves, and to be more strategic when it comes to protecting ourselves. Some patterns, some very, very clear patterns, if we can step back, because most likely you're not going to know all the details of what's happening. Greetings. Is most likely you're not going to know all the details of what's happening in these cults, or what you see going online, whether it's in somebody's house in the United States, or whether it's in another country. So learning to see the patterns and observe patterns can really shorten the learning curve. And we hear a lot of words being thrown around, tossed around, like discernment. Is definitely can shorten the learning curve to being discerning. A key technique and a consistent technique of all the cults, black, white, and otherwise, because they are global, is semantics and wordplay. There's constant, like, there's a bullying, and there's semantics. In order to be manipulated, whether you're in a church, where a distinction with and not limited to a church or a house of worship, because we don't want to just only single out churches, but in houses of worship, when you come in, usually the person that's coming in wants some kind of relief and some type of support, and you find a religious or spiritual um, family. But often what we had in bargain for is you know, being pressured. Somebody else that's more senior to you is going to put you on the lingo, if that's whatever your particular holy book is, or your particular doctrine. Somebody that's more seasoned, right? Each cult, or each manipulation game, has a language and it has a profile. There's usually a dress. There's usually a profile around sexual behavior, and the do's and the don'ts. When somebody's new and fresh and enthusiastic and coming in, it's a lot of questions that they're not thinking to ask, because the first priority is feeling some kind of camaraderie from other people, from strangers, sometimes just a hug, or for them to cry or to process their emotions and the feeling of quote unquote family for many people that are alone. This is part of the draw of cults. There's a lot that people don't learn about until way later. In the case of a cult, when they're finally broken, um, or you've demonstrated your allegiance to the cult, kind of even like a gang, only then will you be exposed to the inner workings of the cult. If they're, and that would apply to any kind of deviancies, any human behavior and deviancies, whether it's sexual, dealing with money, um, lack of transparency. Those things are usually not going to be seen until you are broken and you have demonstrated to the leader that you have an allegiance to that cult. And so once those things are exposed to you, even if they're off behaviors, there has to be a confidence that you're not going to expose that information to other people. So I'm being very purposeful with the words that I'm using so that people hopefully are not triggered, but again, just can take their time to see the patterns. Because when we're triggered, many of us will either go into laughing and joking and going into entertainment mode, or we can go into being egotistical with, well, they're stupid and that's not me. You know, these things can blindside us, right, to seeing what is right there in front of us. And so, as disturbing as a lot of the information that's coming forth is, it is such an opportunity for us um, to get on track with discernment, because it's an area as a collective where we're very underdeveloped. And more so than underdeveloped, maybe another way to say it that maybe is more effective and doesn't sound negative. We have not cultivated discernment. Right. For example, there's so much talk of hypergamy and so many different trends, right? And so I can say, you know, as Black women and chocolate women in the world, and as a woman that's traveled to quite a few countries, it's interesting to see how we're viewed in the world, whether we want to admit it or not, because of our music, right, and our entertainment. So we're not particularly protected or respected. Now, there's a distinction from that where many people find us attractive and may want to bet us and sleep with us, male and female, and they may be enamored with locks and you know what we look like, but that's not necessarily the same thing as respect, protection, or honor when it comes to dealing with us economically. So that would be another example of discernment. A young person or younger person or someone without a frame of reference may not be able to articulate that or pick up on those patterns in their 20s, and not some folks maybe even their 40s and their 50s. So what I'm sharing or I'm putting out there, folks can take it or leave it, is that discernment is something for us to cultivate. And in cultivating discernment, that usually comes with uncomfortable life lessons. Usually, I would say with butt kicking lessons cause discernment, right? A lot of folks won't stop having unprotected sex until they get burnt. Unfortunately, we have a lot of our population, a lot of Black women that have not cultivated discernment because we're so wanting to be loved and protected that we open ourselves up to all kinds of behaviors and not looking at patterns or ignoring patterns because of some basic stuff in us that's just human. It's not wrong, but the cultivating of discernment is not there. And a lot of times it's not there until after the fact. And also once is trauma comes into the game, then we can easily be triggered. So it seems like sometimes no matter how much or in spite of our efforts to do something different, we're not really on our own in a very effective way, understanding our own psychology and what is at the root of our behaviors and what is making us vulnerable to putting ourselves in harm's way and us being manipulated. We're not asking a lot of pertinent questions because and this is some basic stuff. We don't ask questions. We don't want to ask questions. We don't want to come off or appear to be rude or disrespectful to quote unquote elders. So quite often, and it makes sense because we have, again, as a collective, been traumatized. We're so wanting to fit in that it's like there's a drive, and it makes sense. There's such a drive to want to fit in that we are not often dealing in reality. And one reality, for example, is if somebody is a thief or a sexual deviant or a predator, they get old. So sometimes I see in the comments, and I get it because I'm someone, there's so many things that make me feel good, about my culture. That's a very natural thing. But we'll ascribe values to people that have not been qualified. For example, I'll see a lot in comments. People will say divine elder," and I'm sorry. It's common sense to respect elders, and they have definitely life experience and wisdom. That's natural. That makes common sense. But then the reality is, predators, pimps, scammers get old too, and they become. And so if somebody puts on an outfit and speaks with enough confidence, we don't qualify these people, and we feel uncomfortable or in some way like we're, hey, greetings. We feel like we're a traitor, right? We're a traitor to the group. Again, with groupthink, to we're not dealing reality. We feel like we're a traitor to the group if we call something out as we see it. And so without making right or wrong, right, which can be another trap, I would offer to the conversation that it renders us ineffective. It will render us ineffective when it comes time to take action and to inflict and put forth a consequence for actions taken, because consequences are the only thing is the only thing that is respected. And consequences are, if you're in physical danger, that's physical consequences. That's legal consequences and financial consequences. So it's interesting as we hear so many, cultural groups and our efforts. Oh, we have to work together. We hear it over and over, and in essence, that makes sense. But just to ascribe or to assume that everybody has a value system, or that everybody will be honest in their business dealings, or that you can leave your children with everyone and they won't be exploited sexually. These are assumptions that we are ascribing because of our need, a very real need, a very practical need to survive economically. So, what I'm saying is, I'm inviting people, rather than make ourselves wrong or right, I think perhaps it could be effective to see if we're being effective in our thinking. And so we're being constantly pulled from camp to camp to camp, from religious group to spiritual group, and like yet the patterns are the same. The patterns of not dealing in reality for what actually is happening versus what we want to be, the values that we are ascribing to elders or to the group, that we are assuming that people are responsible. We're assuming that people are responsible with their word, that they keep their word. We're assuming that people are responsible with their genitals. We're assuming that people are going to take care of their children. We're assuming that people are going to treat us right. We're making all of these assumptions, which does not line up with discernment. So I'm hoping that this is making sense, because I just want to keep this simple. Um, a lot of the damage and the trauma that many human beings have been exposed to, but trauma, nevertheless, trauma is not. And I'm not saying this. I do want to say that I'm not saying that and I don't think that we need to be a hostage to trauma, right? Because then what that can also do to us, and I, again, as a pattern that I see with us as a people, and it also allows us to be manipulated, is that we'll keep telling the trauma story, not get to the root of understanding and comprehending it, which when we comprehend, then we can have the discernment and we can take corrective action and then make different choices. The responsibility for that is ours, because whether you're a nice person or not, You have to live with your choices, even if you are ignorant. If you expose yourself to a STD, that's it. If you expose yourself to getting scammed, all your money is gone. You're not going to get that back, no matter how much prayers and affirmations. Most likely, your best bet is to get the lesson and to rebuild with some kind of discernment. So I just want to, just tap on a couple of things and keep emphasizing like my main point, because I don't want to go off, because there's so much stuff that comes up as I watch what's happening in our community with the different cult activity. And let's be clear, the cult is not only happening um, overseas or here in Central America. There's plenty and has been plenty of cult activity. Some of this stuff is now just becoming more common knowledge. But a lot of the cult activity is just transferring itself from the States to overseas. So this is a different environment. These communities are smaller. So when it's smaller, for example, African Americans, you stand out when you go somewhere else, and people have a lot of fantasies, and some of them are good. It's warmer weather, it's a different environment, it may seem less stressful. And I was just sharing with another sister. Some of it, which we're thinking that something is better than what we have, and every environment has trade-offs. So if we go not based in reality, resources, um, how you're going to get resources. They're not thinking of the economy. They're not thinking of minimum wage, for example, which here, maybe I shouldn't put that out there, but I can tell you it's less than $4 an hour. How their degree is going to work. People are not thinking about the people that are already there, that they have to eat, and they may feel a way if people are coming from another country and they're just looking to set up shop, and they feel like they're being overlooked. There's so many things that people don't show you online. I've seen numerous people take pictures, and I wasn't a country girl. I have Caribbean family, but I was not raised in the Caribbean like some of my siblings. But I see sometimes people taking pictures in front of fruit trees, and sometimes the fruit isn't something that you would really eat. There are actually some fruits that you actually don't eat out in nature; they're not edible. And so I watch people taking pictures of fruit trees that look very tropical that they don't eat, and they put it online. And so the people in the States are like, ooh, because we haven't been exposed to certain things. So we're constantly being manipulated with the pictures that are being painted online, and it does not lend itself to discernment, because any manipulator, anyone trying to sell you a product, is going to play to your desires of what you want to see. So hopefully that's like some insight in the efforts of cultivating discernment. So again, coming back to the original point of today's sharing, is that the normalization of um, abuse, of being verbally abusive to each other, is making us ripe for these cults. I'm looking at some of the cult activity, and as people are still seeking to come over, let's see if I can make two distinctions. One, a red flag for me to get the heck up out of Dodge is when I saw this elder and this person who I'm putting in high esteem, who I had not lived with, but on the surface seemed like, wow, they're a family person, and they're eating fresh whole fruits and vegetables and 100 acres of land. Wow, that seems like such an accomplishment. So look now with some discernment and some life lessons. Um, and based on what I saw in this person's behavior, once when I saw them speaking, let me know if you can still hear, because it's stable. It's rainy season here, so that I don't know if you can still hear because the connection is unstable here. But when I saw this person speaking to his mate, and as I started to see him speak more to people, in a nutshell, where I come from, I was like, and I even respectfully asked some questions. Seemed like verbal abuse from where I come from, and I was in such shock. I was literally in shock to hear certain things come out of this person's mouth. And when I looked around in the group, no one said anything. All right. So this goes again into the groupthink. And there's a reason why. There's some distinct reasons why I left the cult. If it was so if it was so great, I would still be there. Thinking of growing food and living together in community. These things are not wrong, but again, people are going to play to your desires and discernment. There's a lot that you don't see. I would say again, in terms of shortening the learning curve, we want to think about, and maybe we might need to write those things down. What are the possible things that you don't see? Someone had said in the comments, I think it was a young woman, and maybe it was an older video I did that said cult or something about things to look for. So the person said, well, what things should I look for? So I could have taken that personal and been angry and like, this is obvious. But I pointed out some very specific things to look for, and the person wasn't exaggerating. They said thank you because they did not know what things to look for. So, for example, um, coming into these cults or these groups or these people that you don't know how they resolve conflict. You don't know how they distribute resources. Um, you may not know. I mean, some simple things about where they get the food that they don't grow. Where do they get it from? You can't see people's habits. You can't see the day to day of what people are doing online. So you're usually clicking on a channel to see what it is that you want to see. That's not wrong, but I would invite people to um, put your preferences and what you would like on the table to the side for a moment so that we can be objective and effective in seeing the things that most likely we're not seeing, or once conflict comes up or things don't go your way, you know how to move, if that makes sense, because there's a lot of stuff you're not going to see. There's some things now that, folks are really bold that they let you see. So it depends on the level of the manipulator. Some folks are just cocky. Some folks, if they're more experienced, as with the cult that I experienced, this person is older and seasoned, has invested a lot. So it's to his advantage to be very strategic. It would be a grave and a gross error, right? Again, as people, we can mouth off when we're triggered. It would be a grave error to underestimate somebody in a cult. And a lot of times they're telling you stuff. The cult leader's telling you a lot of stuff. Even the religions are telling you a lot of stuff that's right. They're giving you a lot of right information, but the information is being used to manipulate you. So, for example, we all know we should eat fruits and vegetables for us to be healthy. But a lot of times, another example of what's being manipulated, and it's so simple, it's right in front of people's face, is, for example, this seems so simple, and I've said it several times, and I think it goes over people's heads. Vanity. Let's say a woman is overweight and it's something, maybe she's triggered or stressed, and stress eating, has a whole lot of different responsibilities, and just is not taking the time to, for whatever reason, to exercise and take care of herself. So she feels not accepted because she's overweight or quote unquote fat, especially if you're a young woman. Do you know that this is one way that a cult leader can draw women in, just in terms of the insecurity around um, being overweight? It's so simple. It's so simple, but they're tapping into human, our desire to be accepted, our desire to be wanted, our desire, especially for women, vanity, our desire to feel beautiful. So when someone starts singing these words in your ears, and I'm watching it from somebody that's old, the old G. It's not hard. There's a literal science and there's a formula. And old pimps or old manipulators, they could get it too. They have a game. They have a formula that works and that is effective in pulling people in with the resources of their body, because your body is a resource. Your creative talents is a resource. Your womb is a resource. Many women don't realize that we use to give a cult credibility. No different than presidential candidates or somebody running for office, or a minister. If they have followers, we think in group think. It's not an insult. We follow the crowd. Wow, they're all going over there. Must be something good. Must be something about it. I'm going where they're going, and there's no discernment there. So if we really sit back and we think it's not an insult, but we're not as discerning, and I don't want to say intelligent, but intelligence can be overrated. There's certain things, the intelligence can be trumped. Intelligence sometimes is not necessarily going to shield you from being manipulated. Sometimes my grandpa used to say, you're so smart, you're stupid. You can have so much intellect, but not have an emotional intelligence, or may not, you may have a vocabulary, but may not be able to peep patterns. And you can be very intellectual and sometimes even compensate with vocabulary of being intellectual, but still be very extremely emotionally vulnerable because you've been exposed to trauma at a young age. So not only is uh, verbal abuse normalized in our culture, and I will say in terms of just exploring this because I don't want to be on here too long, but solution or something for us to think of and moving forward, from this place we're at, is for us to have an incentive, a strong enough why, where we can come out of being triggered. Because I could tell you, when I was standing on the side of that road, by that pyramid, and I had a family member in there, I'm not concerned about what anybody's thinking or whatever. I just know my family members in there. Um, we've been manipulated. It's dangerous. It's time to get out. But again, with the group think and trying to put on airs and trying to put on a picture for people that I'm being polite and I'm being intellectual, and I'm being spiritual, then I would be like this and not saying anything or expressing myself. So, what can perhaps be effective is us getting to the why of. And I'm not saying there's a time if a predator or somebody's coming at you physically, that's not the time to be polite. But there's something that I'm just trying to get to. The whole point with what is going to be enough to neutralize us being triggered. That's what it is. Because the triggering is where we're getting got. And if we really look at, a lot of times the people, we're triggered all the time, constantly triggered emotionally. And this is where we get got the majority of the time, right? Where somebody has an opening to our psyche or to our purse or to get into our legs because we are being emotionally and psychologically triggered. And so, as I look at the root of it, is the normalization of verbal abuse and disrespect. Um, Definitely in our music, right? We're so busy enjoying ourselves, we don't see that we're being desensitized to respect and healthy boundaries. And we may not see, a lot of the audience that's out in the TV land or YouTube land or screen land is not realizing how indirectly we are contributing to an environment, just like an environment where bacteria can proliferate and grow out of control, that we have an environment where verbal abuse and disrespect and how we deal with each other is normalized, that it's the perfect breeding ground for us to be vulnerable to cults, if that makes sense. So, how we're speaking to each other, the constant, in their words and their energy, we get caught up in semantics again, but the constant verbal abuse, similar to being desensitized to violence. Um, Popular culture, even popular, I would say, Black culture, is a breeding ground for the unhealthy bacteria of verbal abuse. It's a joke. Our pain is a joke. Um, yeah, just it. Our pain is a joke. Sexual violation is a joke. Um, our children being exposed to all kind of things. The things that we're allowing the children to be exposed to. These children are going to grow up to be adults. We were those children, at one time. So all of the stuff we're being exposed to, it's like a ripe breeding ground for actually more of this stuff to continue. And for those parents, but especially women, whether you have children or not, our spending power, how we spend our dollar. I don't have all of the solutions. I'm not a guru. I'm not anybody's leader. I'm just sharing because it's something that I just feel drawn to just share, that the verbal abuse and how we're talking to the children and not being concerned at all about the language that they're exposed to. I'm not saying not being real. But there's some things that are not child appropriate. And then also there's certain conversations that we're avoiding and we're not having at all because we're uncomfortable. So the verbal abuse, not prioritizing taking the time to educate ourselves about predators and manipulators, because it's not just with the cults. When you start to see some of patterns, these patterns, you'll see them in business. You can see them across the board in terms of just the manipulation, and understand and discern how you are being played and manipulated. And that's necessary so that we can relax. I'm not saying that we need to become paranoid, but we're not peeping a lot of patterns, and we're not seeing when we need to clean up we have the opportunity to clean up the breeding ground, for a lot of things that just make us blind, that make us blindsided. And one of them is the verbal abuse and the way that we're talking to each other. And just another example is, I'm thinking of a recent communication with something. For example, when you see that we're triggered and a small thing can set people off. For example, it could be somebody that's been in a cult, somebody that's been abused, somebody that has been in an abusive relationship, somebody, for example, somebody that's been scammed out of money. When somebody is commenting or making light of your situation, which for you is a life or death situation, or making light of a situation that you and your family members have been exposed to, while it may be mere entertainment for them, just looking on, that's very triggering. So there's something I invite people to take a look at. How often are you triggered? How often are we triggered as a collective and as a people? And in particular, when it comes to cults, one of the techniques that's used is triggering people, right? Their patterns. Again, if we understand how the semantics game is being played, if we can discern how somebody is constantly controlling the narrative of what words mean, these things all get us amped up emotionally. One word can have several different meanings. For example, the Igene word, right? Some people can use it as a term of endearment. My homeboy, being based on our cultural history, somebody else saying the word can totally trigger disrespect. So that's just one example. We're constantly being triggered, and the triggering can likely will short circuit your common sense, or more so than common sense, not just common sense, you being strategic and looking at your environment and how to move and how to protect yourself. So triggering is no joke. Manipulators understand how to trigger you to get you to react, and you're not even really thinking, anymore. Somebody could trigger you and get you to give up all your money. So many people think it's beyond them, and it's really not. It's a study in human behavior and human psychology. So do we need to necessarily read 20 books and people may be pressed for time? No. However, understanding and seeing the patterns can shorten the learning curve. So we can observe, see it, acknowledge it, and then take corrective action. Because a lot of the patterns are pretty much, they're distinct. There are distinct patterns. When I look at this other young cat who has more people coming on from the States, and young people, you're thinking, oh my gosh, how at this point, when this man has said so much stuff out of his mouth, blatant and raw, are there still people in the comment section bigging this person up? Well, again, no one does anything for a reason. Sometimes we ask the question, but we don't take time to stop and to see the answer. For example, a lot of these folks, and again, this is very similar. It looks so different because this person is old and they may seem more peaceful. But when I tell you, it has been consistent. So many of the patterns are consistent. A lot of the folks from this younger cult leader are being told to go into isolation, right? Again, they're younger. They don't have the same frame of reference, right? They're running from certain things in their life, and scared of the options that are presented before them of life. So if they go into isolation and if they come off of the internet, there's so much material that's out there that they just haven't seen. So they're literally ignorant. I can tell you in the cult that I experienced, it's done in a different way, but you isolate yourselves And again, this is a distinct pattern with cults from people that don't eat as you do, that don't eat um, raw fruits and vegetables, and you know, people that they're talked about negatively in purple in terms of people that wear a perm in their head and all that stuff. This may be your cousin so and so. This might be the person that make a phone call to get you out of a situation, or the person that would physically defend you, in a fight. So when you start grouping people and passing condemnation, I'm not saying don't use your common sense judgment. These are ways that you can become isolated, and it's insidious in terms it creeps and it becomes imperceptibly more and more and more. And some of it seems to make so much sense. Another example would be inside one of this cult leader's books, the older G. Um, they explain why you don't touch people because of their energy. People carry certain energy, so you can sense that there's okay, maybe principles and maybe some relevancy to this stuff. But in the end, and looking back, what I can say is I started to feel and started to alienate myself from a lot of my family members, which I never had a problem with them before. They always knew that I ate my healthy stuff and whatever. But by the end of the process, and he's very clear, the older G, it's a slow breaking process. He'll even say a lot, take your time, take your time. The other women or the other young men are grooming the new recruits that are coming in. I could pretty much say I'm pretty confident that, and you can even see that these other people in the other younger cults are being groomed offline. That's the part that you don't see. So when people come online, they're triggered, and most of the people in the comments are like, "I can't believe it. How are you going back over there?" But when really the most that we can get out of this is the life lessons of seeing the patterns of what's going on, and it's the whole process is not to be underestimated. I said in many videos ago, there's a lot of young people that are being encouraged by popular culture just to go out there and free love and this, and on a basic level, there's so much of the population of all ages, whether they're molested or uneducated or older, even seniors, walking around with a lot of STDs in our community, all different types, because of going with groupthink, trying to fit in, or getting poor advice, or not screening people, or not wanting to have uncomfortable situations. So when you have people in their late teens and their 20s that have been exposed to this, they feel like their life is over. There's a lot of shame involved. This is one of the things. In addition to other kinds of cancer or life-threatening illnesses or terminally diagnosed illnesses that would make someone go to a cult or to seek a healer, if that makes sense. These things, sick people that are physically sick are prime candidates for a cult because they want nothing more but to just have a clear diagnosis or a clear blood test and know that they still will be able to have a relationship. So we're underestimating the fact that people are like, well, um, this is going to be better over here, so I might as well settle for this. At least everybody over here has the disease or whatever. There's a lot in cults that's only dripped out that you're not made privy to the information, and they're very, very secretive, and not unless folks in cults, unless they're busted, or unless and even when they're busted, when they come out, they'll tell you that they're exposing the information, but they're going to manipulate it in a certain kind of way. But not until they're busted do they reveal anything, because the whole goal is to paint a picture to lure people in, and they don't necessarily need millions of people to meet their agenda. One of the patterns in the cult is, and again, a distinct pattern, is to break down the person's common sense. This is something that is so distinct, where you're constantly, and again, between this newer cult and the cult that I experienced, the OG, distinct pattern, where you're called into a meeting either with some choice people that are sitting around you, members of the cult, some of the esteemed members of the cult, or the quote unquote cult family. and you're asked questions. The questions are manipulated. How you express yourself and your answers to what the cult leader is saying is manipulated. You're ganged up on. You're bullied. Your emotions are triggered. Then you want to leave. Then, if it's the males telling you, oh, bro, don't go, or the women telling you, oh, don't go, it's like, it's such, and when you're in isolation and you're experiencing that over and over and over, even the smartest person, you can be broken down. There are many adult women, and they were younger when they first came into this cult, that have several degrees, successful, and so they were not poor, raggedy, and out of doors that were in the cult that I was in. But just because you have intellect, or you have financial resources in a position, a corporate or an esteemed work position, that does not mean that you're not vulnerable emotionally, or that the triggers or the trauma that you've gone through with your parents, or maybe being mishandled, or from society, because if you were teased because you were too light or too dark, that doesn't mean that you can't be manipulated in that way. And it may seem simple, but these are some key ways that people are being manipulated into cults. And again, the one of the things that I observed in terms of, I can think of two examples of what I will call with verbal abuse. Okay, so let's say you're teaching a lesson, right? Perhaps this will drive it home with a good example. Is when this person was sitting in a meeting with my sister, my best friend's sister, and I was sitting in a meeting with him, a private meeting. And as he was explaining something about the outside world and the death consumption culture, he had said to my sister, "Don't you see?" He was referring to Jewish people and to clients. "Don't you see that they've ejaculated all up inside of you?" Now stop. That's an example of triggering, right? So I don't know if anyone that's on this live can relate, but that, to even say that, it brings up so much emotions. That is a prime example of triggering. You can't believe that the person is saying it. You're trying to rationalize where they're going with it, but he's saying key words for a reason. He's saying to my sister, in order to break her down and bring her to submission, can't you see that this man has he's using this as an analogy, that because you're working out there in that culture, that the man has ejaculated all up inside of you. When I think of it, the feelings that come up, it's like, that's like you're talking about somebody else, but this elder that's eating fresh fruits and vegetables and looking so peaceful with his family, that feels like a rape. But at the same time, you submit to it because they're helping you and they're saying all the stuff to drive a point home to you, right? And I have to, like, that brings up a whole kind of feeling even in my chest. But it's things like this that can be said to break down women. And don't get it twisted, it can break down men too. So, what I'm saying is, folks that are not privy or don't have a frame of reference for the inner workings of a cult, there are all different kinds of cult, and people say cult is culture, semantics, technique. It's a play of words, and people constantly controlling your narrative. Well, you'll start rationalizing, yeah, I guess cult is really, it is a justification for culture. Or, as I said before, people will start being thankful that they're brainwashed. This is someone controlling the narrative, the context of words, which change when it's convenient, and that have an agenda. If you're isolated and you're traumatized and you're fearful, one of the things I'm observing now is folks, after all that has transpired, folks are still scared of the outside world. They're scared of how are they going to survive economically. This is young males, and this is males and females, folks that have given up their resources to the cult. They literally now can't think of, well, what the heck would I do outside of the cult? So folks resolve to just stay. I might as well stay. Or I've had children inside of the cult now, so I might as well stay. So I'm just saying this. I have a lot of compassion, but in discernment, you can have compassion. You can have affection for a family member. You can have affection. You could quote unquote love and have affection. But if somebody in your family is a pedophile or a drug dealer, you don't leave them with your children and give them the keys to your apartment. So again, in terms of us cultivating a maturity and really learning something from the different couple of the several entertainers, I can think of three in our community: RK, MJ, AB. There are lessons to be learned. Are we going to get the lesson? If we don't get the lessons, we'll continue to not provide a safe space for women and children. And if women and children are not safe, this is it, or as a collective, it won't change. And your best bet, let me not say your best bet. I like to choose my words carefully, but your best bet is going to have to be initially to be discerning for yourself. If your best friend and your homie is not willing to see, or it's too triggering for them to have a conversation about what's really going on, then it's going to be up to you. You can either go with the group think. It's going to be up to you if you're in a situation to walk away, whether that's a cult, whether somebody wants to drink you at a party and you need to break out. Same principle. It's going to be up to you to be discerning and have the confidence to know when to walk away. In a cult, quite often, and they know that everybody will be staying back, banking on the fact that you'll want to be your desires, that you want family and community so much that you won't leave, and you'll still stay and tolerate the dysfunction or the things that are not being addressed. There's a lot of the inner workings of the cult and why we stay in abusive relationships, and it's a lot of verbal abuse. There's verbal abuse in cults. They're not just sitting there talking to you about chanting mantras all the time. And people will quite often hide behind words and hide behind semantics. They could be abusing you emotionally, or violating you in other ways, and saying, how can I describe? Don't you know that I'm doing this because I love you? And this is, or a personal example, this is the best thing. This is what the OG said to me. This is the best thing that's ever happened to you. So somebody that's younger or doesn't have a frame of reference, it could totally boggle and confuse the mind, right? It's working and it's effective because it works. And the predator and the marketers, they understand human psychology. So if um, we're so bent on being right, but not effective, right? We can be right and win the conversation, but not being effective, even learning the lesson, and then wind up repeating the same cycle over again. Um, the other thing is, a lot of us have a tendency to, as can be seen, and I can understand why, to romanticize our culture, right? We can get very offended. For example, this could be triggering. If we heard a person from a much lighter vanilla um, ethnic group and race say that your people had slavery too. And I know traditionally, as for me, that I consider that very offensive, and considered a deflection from the responsibility for what happened in recent history um, with slavery. However, the fact of the matter is, we have had that. We can say it wasn't chattel slavery, but without getting into semantics, there is deviancy in our own community. We have deviancy on all different kind of levels. We have people that are dishonest in their business dealings, dishonest when it comes to sexually mishandling children and women. We have deviancy in our community. And a lot of human beings, and especially in our community, there's a lot of denial. A lot of us are in denial about the violence porn. We're in denial again about just the imagery that's put out on social media, the over sexualization of women and now our children. This may be triggering. So I could care less about people's personal choices. That's their personal choices. But there are a lot of things we may be in denial in, because, again, as women, we want to be so accepted. There's a certain things that we're turning a blind eye to and making assumptions because, and again, this is another pattern of how we will be manipulated by a cult leader or different groups that have their own interests. because a woman is going to, in a nature, the nature of a woman is to make sure that everybody is fed, cared for, and protected. That's everyone. That's not wrong. However, we won't look at deviant behavior. And when I say deviant, I'm speaking specifically of mishandling, when it comes to sexually mishandling young people. Whatever labels want to put people want to put on themselves. There's been a lot of quote unquote priests and ministers and stuff that did not label themselves as same gender interested that have violated a lot of children, or young people. So what I'm saying, we get caught up on a bandwagon or a label when it's really the behavior. So that, I think that's an effective, or I've observed that's an effective way to stay neutral, to stay objective, and to just be effective in our discernment. Because once we get polarized in one of these camps, it can render us blind. It can render us blind to go with what our favorite camp is or our favorite personality, and not focus in on the behavior. I can discern at this point, I'm more concerned about the behavior, and um, are the people that are around me exercising healthy boundaries. We get upset culturally when when people within our own ethnic or cultural group put up boundaries. For example, we can get upset when someone doesn't want, a child doesn't want to hug you, or a family member doesn't want you to feed their child the junk food, or you know what I'm saying. We get upset when people deal and put forth boundaries. But boundaries show a healthy state of mind. They show that you can stand on your square and that you have principles and values within yourself. Well, you're going to protect yourself. It doesn't mean that because you're protecting yourself and your values, that doesn't necessarily make you against someone. But if you don't have discernment, this is how young people that are joined into a cult, or couples that get busted up, because family members get busted up in cults, how a predator or manipulator can turn you against your own family members, or drive a wedge, or if there was a small disagreement or a small wedge there, can drive a huge wedge between uh, cult members and their families. So hopefully this is making sense. So we have a tendency to romanticize our culture and not acknowledge that all human beings can have the potential to have deviant behavior. And so it's the boundaries that can protect and boundaries, what they can look like is us saying, this behavior is not acceptable. I'm going to remove myself from this. If you give me this behavior, I'm going to give you a legal, a physical, and a financial consequence, right? That's something that's set in stone, not just brother, sister, I love you. Because brother, sister, I love you it's not balanced. There's a lot of talk, and we go with empath. And again, we keep coming back to the same thing, that we're martyrs, or we're Buddhists and bodhisattvas, and we're these spiritual persons because we accept abuse. And that's not balance, and it's not spiritual. Or whatever it is. I don't care about the spiritual. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. And I don't think that we're comprehending how much we're actually being damaged. We're being damaged the more we allow ourselves to sit and accept verbal abuse, whether that's in your intimate relationships. This can even go within our families. This could even be from your children, your siblings. Accepting verbal abuse, any kind of abuse, you start to normalize it. And so that is one of the main reasons for my sharing today, is for us to perhaps just take a look and see how us accepting verbal abuse, and for it to be so normalized in our culture, creates a breeding ground, or has provided a perfect environment for folks to just have all kinds of manipulators to have their way with us. So, I get that there's a lot of currently a captured audience, because this is more exciting, because many people can relate it to their lives and the lives of the people around them. There's a very captive audience for these cults and the cult activity. And there's a reason why. Some of us are trying to justify or to work out things that we're seeing in our own personal lives through the cult. So it's like when you go to the movies and people are screaming and talking at the screen and get out of there, or why, we're triggered because in our mind, the mind psychologically doesn't know the difference, if you will. So a lot of these, what we see in movies and a lot of what we see on the computer screen, again, it's very triggering. So hopefully something that perhaps people can take from this sharing is for us to comprehend triggering and how triggering, um, based on previous trauma that may have happened when we were smaller or younger, is being used to manipulate us. And so um, it's beneficial for us to understand just some basics about human psychology, and for us, it may not be to our advantage to think that we're beyond being manipulated, right? Um, and The other thing I wanted to say is that some folks are of the mindset that we should be ashamed for having these dialogues, and having these dialogues on social media. Family members, you shouldn't be airing out our dirty laundry on the internet. The reality, though, is on the world stage amongst human beings, we don't even have to call it the Me Too movement. But the reality is, because people have a camera, um, there's some kind of accountability, because predators and manipulators, one of their worst a consequence, a fear of consequences, to be seen and to be outed, because that will really affect their image. I can definitely say for the cult that I experienced, there's a tremendous amount that I just haven't said for many reasons. One, as I stated initially, that I'm not here for people's entertainment. I don't need millions of followers. Whoever's supposed to come across and get this information so they can make be more discerning and take some corrective action. Um, there could even be some of the parents of cult members that will look for information, so they can do some research, so they can see the patterns, because they're not living inside the cult. So I'm providing information for that purpose, right? Because I would have wanted this information out there for me when I was doing my research. But quite often, people leave cults, they're so shamed that they don't want to talk about it. Or again, with the group thing, we can have a tendency to shame each other. We got so much verbal abuse that's normalized and thought of as funny as in our collective community or culture. But when we speak out, it's seen as a betrayal to the race, a betrayal to the group in terms of groupthink. Why are you saying anything? And so this is one of the reasons why it festers, it goes, and a lot of things go unaddressed. And the things that are unaddressed, the unaddressed trauma, is a ripe breeding ground for people to be molested, because then they're or misabused or abused, because there's so much emotionally that has not been handled, and all these layers are so connected. Again, as I said earlier, there's a basic thing with women in terms of the vanity, of many women are not feeling attractive in terms of their weight, their skin, their hair. This is one of the simple things, but not to be underestimated, that is attractive, a draw to these different cults, because they'll get the quote unquote validation and the attention, and finally get a boyfriend or somebody that's focused on them. But there will be so much more that they don't, being that they don't have a frame of reference, and that they can't see until it's too late. They're gonna get much more than they had bargained for. And once you're in it, and once there are many people, and I'm telling you, these manipulators are not to be underestimated. There's so many cases. Even look at the Jeffrey Epstein. White or black. These are just deviant human beings. If you got enough money, though, you can perhaps get off. Or if the cult leader, as the OG that I encountered, is in enough people's ears that have positions perhaps in politics, or somebody that works at government offices, you can neutralize efforts. So again, it's easy to get distracted by the entertainment factor. But again, rather than be offended, it speaks to where we're perhaps not maturing as a collective. And if we don't mature and get the lessons, then um, more of the same will continue. And actually, it could actually get worse. And you're not going to save everyone. Not everybody's going to do their research. Some people are still going to go over, but there have been some people that have taken it upon themselves, some other human beings with flaws, but there are some other human beings that have taken it upon themselves, whatever their motivation, to speak on these topics, and to say something in our community. I don't know that we speak up much about abuse or manipulation or scamming in our community, but we'll speak up when we feel that we've been wronged by other groups, or by other groups of people and other ethnicities. But we don't seem to want to speak up when it's our own. Hey, greetings, greetings. We don't want to speak up when it's coming from in-house, right? When a lot of the deviancy is in-house. And I can tell you, the similarities and the patterns are so distinct that it's mind-blowing. I've said it before and I've said it again. You're not going to see a lot from this little computer screen. There are pictures that are painted. There's a lot of stuff that people are not even considering. People are thinking that y'all want to run to another country, and there's nothing wrong with traveling, nothing wrong with relocating. Um, but I'll perhaps start to end on this. There's equity that our other generations that we have put in to establish ourselves financially, and resources that we have access to. Every environment has a trade-off. You might find tropical fruits here, but you also have dengue, which is a disease you can get from mosquitoes. The Wi-Fi, the educational resources, the opportunities, the salary. As I was sharing with one woman, you can perhaps go to another country, but culturally you may be ostracized, right? You may just be the only people you may be able to, or you're left to interact with, maybe some of the very people you were running away from because you speak the same language. So even though there's English spoken here, is one of the languages that's spoken, there's so many things when you don't have a frame of reference. So it's to our advantage, before we come in making statements about only what we think we see, right? To ask questions. A lot of times we come in, we make snap judgments, and we don't even ask any questions. We don't have, and this is one of the ways that we're manipulated. Sometimes I'm like, wow, this person could get easily jacked, or it's calmed down, but people will come onto this page and say, oh, where can I get some cheap land? That's a person that's going to get scammed as soon as they get here. If you come around flashing, your money, you're gonna make yourself look like, okay, you may have chocolate skin, but you just come off as the rich American, And if you're coming to an environment where people are making less than $4 an hour, it doesn't make them any less, because they might have land that belongs to their family. So there's just so much that you can't see from the computer screen. It's to our advantage to take our time. You don't know people. You could be so over anxious. I don't necessarily I don't want to live, with everybody. It doesn't mean I don't respect you. I may not run to hug you because you say, oh, I saw you on the internet, and I just open my body up to you. I admit, it's not that I'm paranoid, but life will teach you. We keep talking about, we want discernment. Discernment is a process. Give yourself the time to assess each other. There's nothing wrong. I think it's very respectful to allow relationships and respect to be an organic process. It takes time to get to know people, and you don't know people unless you've lived with them. But what can we do to shorten the learning curve? Respect, clear agreements, contracts with people if you need to, so you keep the boundaries in line, and that both parties know that there will be a consequence. You can always come back and renegotiate if you want, but people respect consequences, physical, legal, and financial. And I really feel for the young people that are there, but I also feel for a lot of women in their 30s and their 40s too that feel so pressured to either have a child. And again, this may seem so simple, but these are some of the ways that we get got. They feel so pressured to have a child. They feel so pressured to be in a relationship that a lot of our common sense can go out of the window because that's how we're able to be manipulated. I had a woman, older woman, say to me years ago, not every woman is going to get married. It's not a death sentence. Um, and more so than it's not a death sentence, it's like these are some of the realities of life. So a lot of what the religion and the cults do is they encourage you to not deal with the realities, or you're trading off one set of stories and beliefs for another. You're just trading off one set of manipulation for another. You're trading off one set of manipulation for control. That's one of the biggest things that I don't think people can see or have banked on. The amount of suffocating control is control. And then later people say, well, we'll start by the time you start getting broke down, well, the control is good for me. I need to be controlled. I need to be brainwashed. It's the amount of control. I mean, it's just astounding. So um, I really encourage people to get educated and just take a look at some of the things that are uncomfortable. You can be in a cult of two, or you may not be in a cult, but you can be in a very unhealthy relationship. Again, another example, unhealthy or a toxic relationship, and just want to be so out of that toxic relationship, or that this elder is going to help you in your relationship and balance out your relationship with your children or your mate or your significant other. So you go to them with your information and your resources to give you counsel and not realize that you're being manipulated. There's so much to be said. And I can't say all in this video that you have not banked on when it comes to these cults or traveling overseas to live with people that you don't know. So healthy boundaries are really in order, like yesterday. But I'm not here to tell grown folks what to do. I'm just sharing some simple information. And finally, you can lose weight if you need to and let your body fall to a healthy weight. That's not impossible. That's not hard. These people don't have some secret herbs or some secret diet. If you're eating too much and you're eating because you're stressed and you're constantly triggered, then and even somebody that's worked in the fitness industry, if you're constantly triggered and you have to go home and you're constantly triggered, you're going to do something to calm that triggering or that nervousness down. Usually that's going to be a vice, or you eating mindlessly or doing something mindlessly. So these are some of the things that people are running from. But you're going to have a whole nother set of triggers and behaviors that are going to be reinforced in a group when you head into these cults. In my research, I didn't even know what shunning was in the JW posse and the J Witness posse. I didn't know anything about shunning. There's just so much that people just, maybe don't have the time or the inclination to educate themselves about this stuff because it seems not important until you're in the situation. But somebody isolating you or encouraging you to isolate yourself from your family, you have common sense. If you need to stay away from people or certain behaviors, you can do that on your own. You don't necessarily need to go into a cult and expose yourself to someone having their way with you sexually, manipulating you and your finances, and just surrendering all of your decision making for your life, which some people will call control. But to surrender all the decision making for your life to another human being with flaws, it's it usually it usually doesn't pan out well. You know, you are responsible for your own life. And trust me, I sit back and every day and think about who was I or what was there going that allowed me, a pretty, I would think, intelligent person to get got by a cult. But it's happening. I don't beat myself up. It's happening on so many different levels. And I got taken to school, and I'm sure life will have more lessons to me. But that particular lesson, got that one, and I always chide myself and remind myself to stay and do a check-in periodically to stay humble, not look at everybody as totally stupid, even though sometimes you're like, oh, that's so stupid. But just to stay humble and to understand it's not the logical when someone is triggering somebody, tapping into their emotions, tapping into their hidden pain. That's how we can get got. So with that, folks, educate yourselves. As I've said before, there's an extensive playlist at your own convenience. You can educate yourself on the patterns of some popular cults, black cults, white cults. Some of them you'll see are prototypes of each other, a white and a black version of the same thing. You can see some cults of doctors, lawyers, rich people. It's on all levels of society. And so if you can see the patterns, I'm pretty sure you'll see, even if you're not in a cult, some of these patterns acting out in day-to-day life around you, if not even in your own family. So with that, folks, um, keep your thinking cap on. And it takes courage to not go with the group think. It takes courage. It takes some time. Yeah, and not everybody's going to like you, but you don't need everybody necessarily to like you. I think I found that the respect is what's preferred, because sometimes you can be liked and well, for whatever liked is, but so-called liked and be mistreated, but you're hanging on to this thread of hope of you being liked, or one day you'll be accepted into the group, or one day you'll be one of the wives, or one day your children will make all the stuff is dangled in front of you until it plays into your fantasy, and you allow yourself to be subjected to all kinds of mental abuse, emotional abuse, and allow yourself to be broken down. Okay, that's enough for now, folks. Take extremely good care of yourselves. Stay alert and eat healthy for your brain to stay alert, and take care of yourselves. All right.